"Ma'am, I need you to empty your pockets and step away from my desk." The command cut through the bank lobby like a whip, halting every conversation mid-sentence. Somewhere near the entrance, the light shuffle of a toddler's shoes stilled. The hum of a copy machine in the back office seemed to pause. Marisol Vega, seated behind her teller window, stiffened in her swivel chair. She didn't lift her head, but her fingers froze on the keypad. Everyone knew that voice. Brent Halverson's bark was unmistakable, especially when he was irritated. But there was something about today's tone. It was sharp, harder. It carried the ugly heat of judgment. The woman seated across from his desk didn't flinch. She wore a gray hoodie, sleeves pulled halfway up to the elbow, and a pair of plain, unfaded jeans. No purse, no briefcase. Just a black leather portfolio zipped neatly shut and resting against her lap like a courtroom exhibit. She looked back at him calmly, the way someone might wait for an elevator door to open. Earlier that morning, she had reached for that portfolio with practiced precision. Inside, neatly tabbed documents, a sealed letter, and a credential wallet she hoped she wouldn't need. She had glanced at her reflection before stepping into the bank's glass double doors. No makeup, no jewelry. She needed them to see what they were conditioned not to see. Competence without packaging. She had told herself, let them see what they need to see first. Brent Halverson stood now, one palm flat against his desk, and the other gesturing as if the entire marble lobby were his courtroom. "Security cameras are recording everything," he said, injecting theatrical concern into his voice. "So don't try anything reckless." No one moved. No one had to. The moment had already gone viral. From the corner of the lobby, behind the freestanding ATM, 17-year-old Lena Thomas sat crouched behind a velvet display rope, her phone tilted slightly upward. Her live stream had started 3 minutes earlier, mostly out of curiosity. Now, her viewer count ticked past 200. Comments flew by too fast to read. One username kept flashing up. Justice Journey. "Get his name. This ain't right." Lena's thumb hovered over the zoom function. She slowly panned toward the man at the desk. "People like you," Brent said, reaching for a bottle of hand sanitizer. "Don't walk into banks like this asking for millions." He squirted 3 generous pumps into his palms, rubbed them together slowly, as if the scent itself could ward off contamination, and made sure to meet her gaze the entire time. Marisol's stomach turned. She'd worked at Heritage First Credit Union for nearly 19 months, long enough to know that when Brent said, "people like you," he wasn't talking about credit scores. The woman did not rise from her seat. Her hands remained folded on her lap. Her posture, straight, still, completely at ease. She said softly, "Sir, perhaps we could discuss this privately." Brent leaned back with a scoff. "Oh, I think transparency is important in banking." He gestured to the room, a flourish. "Let's all see how these kinds of requests are handled. It's educational." Dorothy Halberg, seated across the lobby near the complimentary coffee station, set down her styrofoam cup. She'd been a customer at Heritage First since 1983. Widow, former teacher, retired with savings and a mild distrust of online banking. When Brent arrived 5 years ago, she'd thought him capable, if slightly self-impressed. But now he was embarrassing someone's daughter in front of half the town. Near the security desk, Dante Russell shifted his stance. His eyes remained fixed on the woman's hands. Not a flinch, not a twitch. He'd seen all kinds of behavior in his years as military police and later as private security. But this woman didn't look like someone lost or confused. She looked like someone waiting for a scheduled meeting to begin. Brent held up a manila folder between two fingers. "Let me guess," he said loudly. "This is about that online business loan application you submitted? The one asking for, what was it, $2.3 million? He chuckled like a dad delivering a punchline at a dinner party. Several heads turned. The woman blinked once. Her eyes never left his. Brent flipped open the folder with a flare. "Says here you want to start a community investment fund. Something about minority-owned businesses." He looked up, mock concern etched into his expression. "Very ambitious." The woman said nothing. Brent sighed, gesturing to the vaulted ceiling, the marble floors, the gold-etched nameplate on his desk. This isn't the kind of place where people just walk in off the street with big dreams and no numbers. We deal in reality here. Collateral, track records, institutions. Lena's stream now had 690 viewers. Marisol slowly rose from her chair, glancing at the assistant manager's door. Kyle Merrick sat behind it, half hidden by frosted glass. He pretended not to notice. "Ma'am," Brent continued, "I'm trying to save you from embarrassment. These kinds of requests, they require backing, not buzzwords. Unless you've brought a unicorn investor or a winning lottery ticket in that folder, I suggest you adjust your expectations." Her phone vibrated again. The screen, face up on the desk, flashed a name. Director A. Chen, Federal Compliance Bureau. She let it ring. Outside the bank, a pair of local news reporters sipped their lattes 2 blocks away, oblivious to the storm forming on their Twitter feeds. Inside, the viewers on Lena's stream surged past 1,000. One comment lingered. "She's too quiet. Watch this flip." Brent lowered his voice just enough for the woman to hear. "You think you can dress down, walk in here with no appointment, flash a few printed graphs, and walk out with government-backed millions? Please." She opened her mouth for the first time in several minutes. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about my qualifications." He laughed, the kind of laugh that fills silence with smug certainty. "Oh, I understand just fine," he said. "You heard there were new federal programs to help folks like you, and you thought maybe, just maybe, this would be your lucky day." He stood, letting the height difference do the talking. "We verify here. We check. We dig." He looked at her with finality. "And I think we've seen enough." In the lobby, a sharp inhale came from Mrs. Hallberg. Brent turned to the front desk. "I'm calling the authorities," he said. "We've had incidents like this before. People trying to pass off fabricated documents, getting clever with digital printouts." The woman stayed seated, unmoving. Lena's hands were shaking now, not with fear, but with anticipation. Marisol stepped forward from behind her window. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Brent, maybe you could just read the rest." He didn't turn. "Stay in your lane, Marisol." The woman's phone buzzed again. This time, Special Agent Monroe, FBI Financial Division ignored. Brent lifted the desk phone and dialed. "Heritage First, Cedar Falls branch. We have an individual on site attempting potential financial fraud. Black female, early 40s. Wearing a hoodie. Refusing to leave the premises after loan denial." His voice was smooth, rehearsed. He hung up and turned to her. "Police will be here in 10 minutes. I suggest you gather your things and exit voluntarily before this becomes criminal." She looked up, met his eyes, and smiled. "That's more than enough time." She hadn't raised her voice once, and yet everyone in the room had shifted uneasily in their chairs. Somewhere behind the ATM, Lena Thomas tapped her screen nervously, trying to angle her phone better without drawing attention. The viewer count was climbing fast. 3,000, 3,200, 3,500. And the comments kept coming in with fire emojis and angry questions. What bank is this? She's too calm. Watch this explode. The tension in the air was electric now, no longer confined to Brent Halverson's desk. It seeped into the very walls of Heritage First Credit Union's marble lobby. Even the framed photos of board members along the back hallway looked suddenly crooked under the fluorescent light. Brent didn't notice. He stood with his arms crossed, eyes flicking to the windows as if expecting the cavalry to arrive any moment. There was a swagger in his stance, a satisfaction in how thoroughly he believed he'd controlled the narrative. He didn't just think he was right. He knew it. 23 years in banking, he had told the lobby. He could smell questionable behavior from across the parking lot. And this woman? She was walking right into his script. He hadn't noticed the quiet shift in the room's gravity. He hadn't seen Marisol Vega move 2 steps closer to the front desk. He hadn't registered how Mrs. Dorothy Halberg now stood, quietly clutching the strap of her handbag, watching him with narrowing eyes. He hadn't heard Lena whisper into her mic. She hasn't said a single word in 5 minutes, but I swear, she's in control. The woman remained seated, hands still folded atop her leather portfolio. She hadn't made a move since Brent picked up the phone. Her posture remained impeccable. She gave off the air of someone used to being underestimated and prepared to let it play out. The buzz of a cell phone briefly cut through the silence again. Her screen lit up with a missed call. Federal Compliance Division. Chen. She didn't reach for it. The goal of her visit was still in motion, undisturbed by the noise. Brent, meanwhile, was hitting his rhythm. He turned toward the cluster of customers near the coffee station, voice raised just enough. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I know this is uncomfortable, but we do have responsibilities to protect legitimate account holders. Fraudulent activity is a growing threat in our community." He gestured toward the woman as if introducing evidence in a courtroom. This individual submitted an online loan request for $2.3 million with insufficient documentation. When I attempted to explain our policies, she became evasive. A murmur stirred near the teller's booths. That was when Mrs. Halberg took a step forward. Her voice was quiet, but it carried with surprising strength. "Excuse me, young man," she said. Brent paused mid-sentence, clearly surprised to be interrupted. "Yes, ma'am," he said, adjusting his tone to his most patronizing courtesy. "I'm Dorothy Halberg, account number 223598887. Been banking here since Ronald Reagan's first term." Brent offered a tight smile. "Of course, Mrs. Halberg. I appreciate your loyalty." "You can appreciate my loyalty by answering a question," she said. "Why are you treating this woman like she's robbing the place for asking about a loan?" A quiet gasp rippled from the back of the lobby. Brent blinked, clearly caught off guard. I'm following protocol, ma'am." Dorothy's eyes narrowed. "Is protocol what you call shouting at someone in front of a room full of strangers?" Brent opened his mouth, closed it, then forced a smile. "This individual presented materials that raised red flags. You haven't even looked past the first page," Dorothy shot back. Lena's camera caught the entire exchange. The live stream passed 6,000 viewers. In the comments, someone wrote, "Granny just cooked him in 1 sentence." Across the room, Marisol felt her heart climb into her throat. Her hands trembled slightly. She thought of her father, who had tried for years to get a small business loan to expand his landscaping company. Always told to come back with more paperwork. She thought of her mother crying in the kitchen the night he gave up and went back to mowing lawns on weekends just to cover rent. And now, here was Brent, doing the same thing again. Something inside her snapped into place. She stepped forward. "Mr. Halverson," she said quietly. "Maybe we should take a second look at her documents." He whipped around. "Marisol, I said stay in your lane." Her voice didn't waver. "She's not yelling. She hasn't made a scene, and she's sitting there with a full application we haven't reviewed. That's not what we're supposed to do, sir." Brent's face darkened. His jaw tightened. "You're a teller," he said sharply. "You don't speak for this institution." The silence that followed was thick, humid with discomfort. The woman at the desk finally looked up. "Mr. Halverson," she said, voice as calm as before, "are you absolutely sure that calling the authorities is the wisest decision today?" There was no challenge in her tone, no sarcasm. It was the kind of question you'd ask someone double parking their car in front of a fire hydrant, a factual prompt suggesting consequence. Brent squared his shoulders. "I've been doing this long enough to know when I see manipulation," he snapped. "You filled out a flashy online form and came here hoping to pressure someone into skipping procedure. That's not how this works." He turned to the approaching uniformed officer stepping through the glass doors. "And now we'll have the police explain that to you." The officer nodded politely, stepping forward. "Good afternoon. We received a call about a potential fraud incident?" Brent waved a hand. "Yes, that's correct. This woman— Excuse me." The voice came from behind the officer. A second man entered. Taller, dressed in a charcoal gray suit with a blue Homeland Security lapel pin and leather ID badge around his neck. He approached with calm, deliberate strides and stood beside the woman's chair. "Agent Elijah Monroe, Federal Financial Crimes Division," he said. "I believe this is the woman you just called in." Brent's face froze. The color drained from it. Agent Monroe extended a hand toward the seated woman, then snapped into a crisp salute. "Director Warren, ma'am, my apologies for the delay. We've been following your live updates. Compliance team is prepped and standing by." The lobby fell silent. Dead silent. Lena's live stream ticked past 11,000 viewers. The words "Director Warren" rippled through the comment feed like fireworks. Marisol dropped her pen. Dorothy Halberg whispered, "Lord help us. She was the investigator all along." Brent stumbled backward a step. You're a federal officer?" Director Celeste Warren stood for the first time. Her voice, soft and deliberate, carried like a verdict. "I am the Senior Director of Compliance Oversight for the National Banking Authority," she said. "This branch has been under unannounced audit for the past 43 minutes." She pulled a small black device from her portfolio. Red light blinking. "Every word, every action, every refusal to review submitted documentation," she said, "has been recorded." Brent stared at her. You tricked me." "No, Mr. Halverson," she replied. "You exposed yourself." The arriving officer turned toward Agent Monroe, clearly out of his depth now. "Do you need us here, sir?" Monroe shook his head. "Thank you, officer. We'll take it from here." "Copy that," the officer said, tipping his cap as he left quietly. Celeste returned her gaze to Brent. He was frozen, mouth slightly open, like a man trying to remember how to speak in public. The lobby was watching. Phones were recording. And every ounce of the smug certainty he'd worn like a crown for 2 decades was dissolving under the weight of revelation. From behind the teller counter, Kyle Merrick's head slowly dropped into his hands. And Lena, still filming, whispered, "She's not just someone. She's the audit." That was when Mrs. Halberg took a step forward. "Excuse me, young man," she said. "Why are you treating this woman like she's robbing the place for asking about a loan?" You called the FBI on a federal investigator who was already investigating you, Agent Monroe said quietly. That's obstruction, Mr. Halverson. The words didn't echo, but the silence that followed made them feel carved into the very air of the lobby. Brent Halverson stood slack-jawed, his eyes darting from Monroe to Director Celeste Warren, then back to the growing crowd of customers, now standing, watching, phones out. Sweat bloomed on his forehead in glossy patches, trickling down his temple like truth escaping through skin. Earlier, Brent had insisted that 23 years in banking gave him the instincts to detect fraud. But no amount of tenure could prepare him for this reversal of power. He'd mistaken calm for weakness, formality for inexperience. Now he looked like a man realizing too late that he'd walked into his own deposition and brought the press with him. Outside, the whir of a news van's satellite dish locking into place added to the buzz. Inside, Lena's livestream feed had reached 17,000 viewers. She no longer spoke into the mic. She didn't need to. The comments spoke for her. He messed up bad. You can see the moment his soul leaves his body. Obstruction? That's prison talk. Celeste remained composed as she turned back toward the desk. She unzipped her portfolio with the precision of someone who'd done this before. Many times. She removed a manila envelope and handed it to Agent Monroe. He scanned the cover sheet, then gave a small nod. His voice was low, but clearly audible. The full compliance file, he said. Loan rejection statistics, personnel conduct logs, and digital footage, already mirrored to the National Banking Authority server. Authentication code ends in 864. Brent's knees buckled slightly. He reached for the desk's edge to steady himself. Then Celeste's phone buzzed again. This time she picked it up and pressed the speaker icon. Nathaniel Cho, came the voice on the other end. President, Heritage First Credit Union. Who am I speaking with? Director Celeste Warren, she said evenly. Senior Federal Compliance Officer, National Banking Authority. You're on speaker, Mr. Cho. Please be aware, this conversation is being recorded. A pause. I see, Cho said, his voice cracked with restrained panic. Director Warren, we are receiving multiple media inquiries, and our board members are alerting us to a developing incident at the Cedar Falls branch. This is not a developing incident, Celeste replied calmly. This is an ongoing investigation. Another pause. Then, how serious is this? The branch manager falsely reported a federal officer as a fraud suspect. Live video documentation confirms this action was not only discriminatory, but also in violation of federal law. Brent opened his mouth, but no words came. Dorothy Halberg stood nearby, arms crossed. She hadn't sat down once since her initial challenge. Her presence, in her tan wool coat and orthopedic shoes, somehow gave the moment a generational weight, as if everything she had endured and witnessed had led to this reckoning. Celeste spoke again, her tone unchanging. In addition to civil rights violations, we are preparing a recommendation for criminal obstruction charges under federal code. Mr. Cho, do you intend to cooperate? There was no hesitation now. Absolutely, yes. Whatever's required. Good, she said. Because I've just activated compliance authority. This branch is under temporary federal supervision. The line went quiet again. Brent slumped into the chair behind his desk. You have no idea what this is going to do to my reputation, he muttered, eyes glassy. Celeste tilted her head slightly. You're mistaken, Mr. Halverson. I have every idea. A commotion near the entrance drew attention as a courier rushed in with a sealed envelope. He handed it directly to Agent Monroe and departed without a word. Monroe opened the envelope, removed a printed directive, and showed it to Celeste. She nodded, then turned to Brent one final time. "These are your immediate orders of suspension, effective as of 30 minutes ago," she said. "Your access to all internal systems is revoked. You are prohibited from contacting any employees or customers of Heritage First until further notice." Lena's stream pinged as her viewer count hit 23,000. Marisol, still standing to the side, let out a shaky exhale. Her heart was pounding. She'd never seen justice move this fast or this precisely. Her fear had dulled into something sharper. Resolve. Kyle Merrick stepped out from behind the glass-paneled office, his face pale. "Director Warren," he stammered. I just want to clarify I wasn't involved. I didn't agree with how Brent handled things." Celeste turned slowly to face him. "Mr. Merrick," she said, "you've been present for 43 minutes. During that time, you witnessed discriminatory conduct, verbal abuse, and unlawful reporting. Did you intervene at any point?" Kyle swallowed hard. I didn't think I had the authority." "You didn't need authority," she replied. "You needed integrity." The response hung in the air, final and unimpeachable. Agent Monroe checked his tablet and glanced toward the front entrance. "Ma'am, I've received confirmation. The board has issued preliminary approval for your full compliance restructuring plan. Implementation authorization is yours." Dorothy's eyebrows lifted. "Restructuring plan?" Celeste nodded. "Effective immediately, this branch will begin a 6-phase remediation under direct oversight." Brent looked up. "You're tearing this place apart." "No," she said simply. "I'm rebuilding what should have existed all along." It was then that Lena's live stream pinged again. Viewer count, 27,000. In the comments, one line scrolled by repeatedly. "Tear it down. Build it better." Celeste stepped forward and turned to the room. "To the customers of Heritage First," she said, voice raised just enough to fill the space. "I want you to know this is not just about one man's behavior. This is about a system that allowed that behavior to fester, unchallenged. That ends today." She turned to Marisol, whose breath caught. "You've demonstrated the courage that others here lacked. We'll need that going forward." Marisol blinked. "Me?" "You're being promoted," Celeste said. "Effective immediately. Interim branch manager." Gasps rippled across the lobby. Kyle staggered back a step. Brent's mouth fell open. Marisol stood frozen, trying to process the words. "But I'm a teller." Celeste smiled. "You were a teller. Now you're the first leader of this branch's new chapter." Outside, local news vans began to line the sidewalk. Inside, customers stood speechless, watching history reshuffle itself before their eyes. And as Brent Halverson was led away by security, shoulders slumped, Dorothy whispered aloud what many were thinking. "Justice wears a quiet face, but it walks like thunder." Monroe's phone vibrated. He checked the screen, looked up, and turned to Celeste. "Ma'am," he said, "the board's authorizing Phase 1. Full compliance powers granted." Celeste nodded, eyes narrowing just slightly. "Phase 1 begins now." "You called the FBI on a federal investigator who was already investigating you," Agent Monroe said quietly. "That's obstruction, Mr. Halverson." The weight of those words still lingered in the air, even after Brent had been quietly escorted out of the building. But the mood inside Heritage First Credit Union's Cedar Falls branch hadn't lifted. It had only shifted. Where there had been tension, now there was stunned attention. Something irreversible had begun, and everyone in the room felt it. Just minutes earlier, Nathaniel Cho's voice had crackled through the speakerphone in panic. Now that same voice had turned conciliatory, deferential, scrambling for preservation. Celeste Warren had taken full command of the space, and her presence transformed the sterile bank lobby into something unrecognizable. A courtroom, a command center, a lesson in accountability. Marisol Vega stood behind the front desk, still too stunned to sit. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles pale, heart still galloping. Interim branch manager. The words kept repeating in her head like a radio stuck between stations. She hadn't even dared to imagine leadership. She had just hoped not to be fired for speaking up. But something else lingered under the shock. Something warmer. Steadier. The feeling of standing on the right side of history. Celeste walked toward the teller window, every eye following her. Lena Thomas was still live streaming. Her phone, now propped against a stand she borrowed from a promotional flyer holder, displayed a flood of comments and a viewer count nearing 30,000. Outside, 2 more news vans had parked near the curb. Cameramen and field reporters began setting up behind the glass walls. Agent Monroe stood just behind Celeste, tablet in hand, monitoring the compliance dashboard in real time. Nathaniel Cho's voice returned over speaker. "Director Warren, our legal counsel is standing by. We'd like to discuss how we can remediate the situation." Celeste paused in front of the desk, turned toward the phone, and spoke clearly. "Remediation begins with consequences, then with structure." "Of course," Cho said quickly. "What does that look like?" Celeste motioned to Monroe, who tapped his screen and projected a compliance framework onto the wall-mounted television in the lobby. 6 bullet points appeared, each highlighted in red. Immediate terminations. Community Development Fund. Bias training. AI oversight. Independent audits. Loan review protocol. She began reading them aloud, slowly. "First," she said, "all personnel involved in discriminatory actions today, Brent Halverson and Kyle Merrick, are to be permanently banned from holding financial roles in any federally chartered banking institution. This includes management, consulting, and compliance positions." Gasps from the remaining staff. Kyle, standing off to the side near the break room door, went pale. "Second," she continued, "Heritage First must immediately commit $5 million toward a community development fund targeted at minority-owned businesses within the Cedar Falls metro area. This fund will be administered independently and publicly audited." Cho's voice stammered. That's a significant amount." Celeste didn't blink. "So is the damage done?" She moved to the next point. "Third, all employees, from teller to executive, will complete federally approved bias and inclusion training on a quarterly basis. Completion will be tracked by the National Banking Authority and tied directly to performance metrics." Marisol's breath caught in her throat. Not because she feared the training, she welcomed it, but because for the first time, someone was saying it plainly. The culture would not repair itself. "Fourth," Celeste went on, "real-time monitoring software will be installed across all branches. This system will flag patterns of discrimination in lending, customer service, and employee evaluations. All flagged incidents will be sent directly to federal monitors." Agent Monroe tapped a few keys, and the first data feed scrolled onto the screen. Loan approval rates by demographic, updated every hour. Fifth, quarterly community audits will be conducted by independent civil rights organizations. Their findings will be published in full and made available on both the institution's website and federal compliance dashboards. Outside, local reporters began speaking into microphones. Through the windows, the words "Bank under federal control" flashed on a news ticker. Lastly, Celeste said, voice sharpening, Heritage First must review all loan denials from the past 24 months. Each application must be re-evaluated for possible discrimination. Customers wrongly denied access to capital will receive priority reconsideration and financial redress. A customer at the back of the lobby, an elderly black man in a Vietnam veteran cap, lowered his head and closed his eyes. A moment passed before he whispered, "Thank you, Jesus." The room was still. Lena's stream surged again, hitting 34,000 viewers. Cho's voice returned, now stripped of all corporate polish. "Director Warren, we accept all terms." Celeste said nothing for a moment, then, "Very well. Phase 1 of restructuring begins immediately." She turned back to Marisol. "You'll implement the first wave. Hire a leadership team that reflects this community. That means race, language, disability, age, veteran status, inclusive hiring, transparent pay, auditable processes." Marisol stepped forward, still uncertain, but no longer afraid. "I understand," she said. "I'll do everything required." Celeste placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You'll do more than that." There was a long beat before Celeste continued, turning her attention to the lobby at large. "To the customers of this branch," she said, raising her voice just slightly. "Your presence here today, your witness, has ensured that this would not be buried, ignored, or dismissed. Systemic discrimination thrives on silence. But today, you were not silent." Dorothy Halberg stepped closer, her voice steady. "What happens next, Director?" Celeste looked at her. "We ensure it never happens again." The glass doors opened once more. Another courier entered, this time with a large envelope and a hard drive in hand. He handed both to Monroe. "From the Office of Congressional Oversight," he said quietly. "They've requested immediate documentation." Monroe nodded. "They're watching now. Senate subcommittee is requesting a briefing tomorrow." The implications were enormous. What had started as a single confrontation was now being pulled into the national spotlight, a live case study in accountability. Every syllable was being watched, every reaction dissected. Celeste turned once more toward Marisol. "There's one more appointment to make." Marisol looked confused. "There is?" Celeste motioned toward the security desk, where Dante Russell stood silently, hands clasped in front of him, posture erect as always. "You recognized the situation. You maintained control. You protected both your post and the people inside it." Dante blinked. Celeste nodded. "You're being promoted to Community Relations Coordinator for this branch. You'll oversee safety, event coordination, and customer equity outreach." Dante hesitated. "Ma'am, You're a veteran, a professional, and today you were a stabilizing force during a federal investigation. That matters." Dorothy whispered to Lena, "They're building the new world right in front of us." Lena caught it on the live stream. In the comment feed, someone wrote, "This is what real justice looks like. Not loud, just undeniable." Celeste turned to face the entrance one final time. A hush fell over the room. Then, without changing her tone or expression, she delivered the next words that would soon appear on news outlets across the country. "Phase 1 begins now." "Phase 1 begins now," Celeste Warren announced, turning toward Marisol Vega. You've been promoted to branch manager." The silence that followed was so complete, it made the clink of Lena Thomas accidentally knocking over a brochure holder feel like an explosion. The livestream's comment feed accelerated into a blur. The woman who had walked into the bank 17 minutes ago to process cash deposits was now its highest-ranking employee. And she hadn't asked for it. She had earned it by refusing to stay silent. Marisol stood frozen behind the teller counter. Her eyes darted from Celeste to the glass doors, to Kyle Merrick's pale face, then back to Celeste again. "Me?" she asked, barely louder than a breath. "You," Celeste said with calm authority. "Effective immediately." Kyle took an involuntary step forward, panic rising in his throat. Wait a second, you can't just—" Agent Monroe cut him off without raising his voice. "You are suspended from all management duties, Mr. Merrick, pending the outcome of the federal review. You were present during the violation and failed to act." "I didn't do anything," Kyle protested. Celeste's gaze was steady. "Exactly." The tension in the lobby didn't deflate, it deepened into a new shape. Not the electric shock of confrontation, but the grounded weight of change taking root. Marisol swallowed hard. "I'm honored, Director Warren. But what if I'm not ready?" Celeste nodded. "None of us ever are, until we are. But you have the one trait Brent Halverson never had, the courage to risk your own comfort for what's right." Outside, a third local news crew had arrived. Cameramen positioned themselves against the window. The bank was now fully surrounded by press. Monroe stepped forward. "We're authorizing personnel changes now. Human Resources has been notified." Celeste turned toward the center of the lobby. "We're not finished. There's more to restore than just staffing. There's trust." She lifted a second folder from her portfolio. It bore the Federal Compliance Bureau's seal and a label in bold. Immediate Federal Remediation Protocol. Level 3 Enforcement. "Mr. Cho," she said, her voice directed at the speakerphone now connected to Cho's private line. "You've accepted the 6-point compliance mandate, but we'll need to see implementation begin today." Cho's voice came through more composed this time. "Understood. We'll do whatever is necessary to avoid formal charter suspension." "Good," Celeste replied. "Let's begin with the most visible symbol of change. We're clearing space in this lobby to host the Community Audit Task Force next quarter. Marisol will oversee its formation." Marisol blinked. "Me?" "You will represent the future of this institution, and you'll choose your team." Marisol slowly nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Celeste continued. "You'll also administer the $5 million Community Development Fund. Partner with local organizations. Find entrepreneurs who've been shut out. Offer resources to those who never thought to ask." Dorothy Hallberg, who had returned to her seat near the coffee station, set her purse aside and spoke up. "Can I help with that?" All eyes turned toward her. "I don't mean in any fancy way," she added quickly. "But I know people. I know which small businesses have been turned away year after year. I can help make a list." Celeste smiled. "We'd be honored, Mrs. Hallberg." Monroe noted something on his tablet. "That's logged. She'll be added to the advisory board for the community review." Kyle Merrick leaned against the wall now, deflated and silent. Lena's stream caught his posture in full view, and the comments turned sharp. "This is what silence looks like." He had a chance to speak up. Dorothy turned toward Kyle. "You had a chance to say something before the police were called. Before the lie was told." He looked down. Meanwhile, Agent Monroe approached Dante Russell at the security station. "I understand you have military experience. What was your branch?" "Army," Dante said, standing a bit straighter. Military police, 12 years. Monroe nodded. We've reviewed your conduct, your restraint, the way you de-escalated the room while keeping eyes on everyone. Celeste joined them. We'd like to appoint you as Community Relations Coordinator. Your job will be to ensure that all future customers, especially those from historically excluded communities, feel safe and heard here. Dante's eyes widened. That's a real role? It is now, Monroe replied. The energy in the room was changing, not into celebration, but into a kind of reverent attention, like witnessing a building's foundation being poured before your eyes. Celeste walked toward the service counter and motioned for Lena Thomas to join her. The girl hesitated, then slowly approached, phone still filming. You sparked this entire reckoning, Celeste said softly, so only Lena could hear, with one decision to press go live. Lena looked up. I didn't know it would go this far. That's how change begins, Celeste said. No one ever does. She turned to address the room again. Lena's footage, her lens, was not just documentation, it was accountability, a citizen holding up a mirror to power. And that mirror today saved a community from silence. Lena lowered her phone and blinked quickly, overwhelmed. Monroe spoke again. We've received confirmation that the live stream has been entered into congressional record. The video will be used as testimony in the next subcommittee hearing on discriminatory lending practices. Gasps. Even Marisol's knees wobbled slightly. Celeste said, This bank is now a case study in how federal enforcement and community vigilance can rebuild public trust. Marisol found her voice again. We'll earn that trust. From scratch if we have to. Celeste placed a final file on the desk, thick, bound, and stamped with an official seal. These are the loan applications previously denied over the last 24 months, all flagged for potential racial bias. They're your first task as manager. Marisol reached for the file slowly, like someone picking up something sacred. Monroe stepped to the front of the lobby. All personnel not involved in today's violations are to report to a private briefing room for training assignments and new onboarding procedures. Federal monitors will be stationed on site for the next 90 days. As staff began to move toward the back hallway, Celeste remained standing in the center of the room. Dorothy, Lena, Dante, and Marisol stood near her. A quiet alert dinged on Monroe's tablet. He looked at Celeste and said in a low voice, Director, congressional interest is escalating. Senator Washington just requested a full audit protocol within 72 hours. Celeste nodded. We'll be ready. Monroe tilted the screen toward her. And one more thing. The live stream has reached 34,000 viewers, trending #1 in the nation. A murmur passed through the lobby. Celeste's gaze didn't change. She looked at the entrance doors, then at Marisol. You're the future of this place now. Build it like you wish you'd found it. Marisol took a breath. I will. And then Celeste turned to the room one final time. The first denied loan up for reconsideration belongs to someone here. Heads turned, eyes widened. She opened the file and placed a slip of paper on the counter. Mrs. Halberg, your grandson's application from 6 months ago, denied due to lack of community ties, has been reclassified as priority. Dorothy gasped, tears welling immediately. He's been working 3 jobs, she whispered, trying to open that food co-op on Jackson Avenue. Celeste nodded. The loan will be expedited, effective immediately. Dorothy reached for Marisol's hand. Marisol smiled, her voice steady. 2.1% interest, exactly what we discussed. 6 weeks later, the nameplate on the manager's desk read, Marisol Vega, branch manager. It sat gleaming atop a reclaimed oak counter, now softened with warm wood grain instead of the cold marble that once reflected arrogance. The branch no longer smelled like lemon-scented antiseptic. It smelled like fresh coffee, donated by a local roaster whose microloan had come through just 10 days earlier. The walls had changed too. Where there had once been stock photos of business people in anonymous suits, there were now framed portraits of local small business owners, each accompanied by a plaque. Loan approved. Community Impact Fund, 2024. The transformation was not just visual, it was cultural. Heritage First Credit Union in Cedar Falls, Illinois, had become something unrecognizable from the place it had been the day Dr. Celeste Warren first stepped through the door. The memory of that day lingered in Marisol's mind constantly, not as a burden, but as fuel. It echoed in her steps each morning as she unlocked the front door at 7:45 a.m., and it rang in her ears as she scanned each new loan application. Not for flaws, but for potential. This morning, sunlight poured through the tall glass windows. A slow line of customers waited patiently, many of them nodding to Marisol as she passed. Outside, a community college van dropped off a group of business students scheduled to shadow her team that afternoon. Inside, a toddler tugged at her mother's hand near the pamphlet wall, each flyer freshly reprinted and translated into Spanish, Vietnamese, Somali, and Tagalog. Dante Russell now had his own office. The plaque on his door read, Community Outreach and Equity Officer. Inside, behind his desk hung a photo of his army unit in Iraq, right next to a certificate of federal bias training completion and a snapshot from a block party the bank had helped sponsor just 3 weeks ago. His once silent posture had evolved into confident leadership. Today, he was reviewing applications from Black veterans for small business startup grants. In the back conference room, Lena Thomas clicked through her internship tasks on a sleek federal-issued laptop. She wore a badge now, Federal Reserve Public Affairs intern, and split her time between school and assisting Celeste Warren's media team. Her live-stream footage from that day had been inducted into the Smithsonian's Civil Rights Archives just 4 days ago. She still carried the original phone in her backpack, battery drained, screen cracked. It was a relic now, one she refused to replace. Marisol knocked on Dante's door gently. Mr. Williams is here. The loan applicant, Dante nodded. Bring him in. Bring. A young black man stepped into the room, dressed in a navy button-down and khakis. His hands were rough with labor, his voice gentle as he spoke. I'm starting a mobile mechanic service. Already have the van. I just need equipment and insurance up front. Dante flipped through his paperwork. Credit's solid. Business plan's tight. Looks like you've already done the work. Mr. Williams gave a small, hopeful smile. I was told this branch actually reads applications now. Dante leaned forward. We do more than read. We believe in second chances, and in those who never had a first one. Marisol stepped out and crossed the lobby. On the digital screens above the teller stations, equity metrics flashed in real time. Approval rates by demographics, satisfaction scores, audit readiness. Heritage, first now ranked in the 97th percentile nationally for inclusive lending practices. A bell chimed at the front door, Mrs. Dorothy Hallberg walked in slowly, her cane clicking rhythmically on the polished floor. She'd become a regular presence, unofficially titled Community Liaison by nearly every staff member. Today, she wore a violet scarf and carried a clipboard. Marisol greeted her warmly. Quarterly audit results are in. You'll be happy." "I'm already happy," Dorothy replied. "I walked through a bank door and wasn't afraid for someone else." She made her way to the conference corner, where representatives from 3 local organizations waited for the community roundtable. One of them, a young Somali woman in a red hijab, had just received her second business loan to expand her catering company. Another, a former factory worker, was teaching financial literacy at the bank twice a week. Celeste Warren had kept her promise. The systems didn't just change, they stayed changed. Federal monitors still arrived unannounced. The real-time discrimination alert system sent data directly to the National Banking Authority every 4 hours. Any flagged discrepancies in customer treatment were investigated within 48 hours. Marisol remembered something Celeste had said as she handed over the keys to the branch. "Build it like you wish you'd found it." She had. Now she stood at the counter, approving a loan with a 2.1% interest rate for a Vietnamese seamstress expanding her storefront. The same rate Dorothy's grandson had received for his co-op. Fair, transparent, predictable. She smiled. On the wall behind her hung a mural unveiled last week. Painted by a local high school student, it depicted the bank's original marble lobby dissolving into a wide-open landscape, rows of homes, corner bakeries, startup offices, and kids playing outside. In the center stood a black woman in a plain gray hoodie, holding a folder to her chest like a shield and a torch all at once. The caption beneath read, "Dignity lives here." In Washington, Celeste Warren sat before the Senate Banking Committee, responding to questions from lawmakers about institutional equity. Her poise was as effortless as ever. "Director Warren," asked Senator Washington, "what made this particular investigation so effective?" Celeste folded her hands and looked directly at the senator. Documentation, clarity, and the refusal to accept disrespect as standard practice. Back in Cedar Falls, Dante finished Mr. Williams's application and extended his hand. "Approved. Funds available within 24 hours. Mr. Williams shook his hand in disbelief. "I don't know what to say." "Say it to the next person you mentor," Dante replied, "and make sure they don't stop at the door just because someone doubts their worth." Outside, the sun dipped slightly as another news crew arrived. Not for scandal, but for celebration. Heritage First was being profiled as a national model for inclusive economic development. The headlines had changed from Bank Under Fire to Bank Reborn through accountability. Lena stepped out from the back office and stood near the entrance, watching new customers walk in. Black, white, Latino, Southeast Asian, Arab, young entrepreneurs, elder retirees, new immigrants and returning veterans. None of them hesitated at the door anymore. Marisol adjusted the new policy binder on her desk and made a final note. "Remind staff that compliance isn't a task. It's a culture." Then she turned to Mrs. Hallberg. "I'm thinking we open up Saturday mornings for new business applicants only," she said. "Low stakes, conversational. Coffee, maybe some pastries. Invite only for now." Dorothy grinned. "Make sure the pastries are from Raoul's. He got that oven from the first loan, remember?" "I remember," Marisol said. "We're building it." Dorothy's eyes glistened. "You already have." It began with a woman in a gray hoodie, standing in the lobby of a polished suburban bank, asking for something simple: to be treated with fairness. No stage, no microphone, no entourage. Just a quiet authority shaped by years of watching dignity get mistaken for silence. Dr. Celeste Warren never raised her voice, never made a show of credentials. And yet, in less than an hour, she changed the soul of a building and left behind a blueprint for how justice breathes when it's given room to stand. That branch of Heritage First Credit Union had no idea who she was when she walked in. And that's the point. They didn't see her. Not really. They saw a black woman without an appointment. They saw what they thought was an outsider, someone to deny, to question, to dismiss. But beneath that plain folder she carried, there was something more powerful than any name badge or polished title. Accountability. What happened that day was not about one man's rudeness or one employee's silence. It was about a culture that had grown so comfortable with systemic exclusion, it mistook it for procedure, a policy binder thicker than the will to listen, a series of scripted denials wrapped in formal language that hid their true purpose. Celeste didn't storm the gates. She simply held them open long enough for the truth to walk through. And when it did, when Lena Thomas tapped Go Live, when Dante chose restraint, when Marisol chose courage, when Dorothy Halberg chose clarity over comfort, the dominoes fell. The federal badge came later, the title too. But long before that, justice was already speaking. Because justice doesn't always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it comes with a pause before answering. A glance held a second too long. A voice that doesn't flinch. Celeste gave that room, that building, and that entire institution the opportunity to see itself, unfiltered. And when it did, it could never again claim ignorance. Marisol Vega's rise to manager wasn't a reward. It was a realignment, a correction. The kind of promotion that told the staff and community both, your silence is no longer policy. Your values will be measured not by your slogans, but by your actions. Dorothy Halberg's clipboard held more than notes. It held memory. Generations of watching the system close its windows to those who built the walls. Her voice became a bridge between past harm and future trust. And Dante Russell, once a quiet security guard with the training to fight, but the instinct to protect, became a symbol of how institutional integrity is safeguarded not just by laws, but by people who live their values in the cracks where no one's watching. Even Lena, the youngest among them, proved that history doesn't require permission to begin. Her phone captured more than video. It preserved a moment when the lie that nothing ever changes was proven wrong. In the end, it wasn't about a single branch being reformed. It was about exposing a truth many have felt, but few have seen so clearly documented. That exclusion is not always shouted. It is often whispered into policy, normalized into habit, and camouflaged by formality. But when confronted, firmly, respectfully, and without apology, that system cracked. And in the cracks, something better took root. Now, when people walk into that bank, they don't hold their breath. They don't steel themselves for a subtle wound. They walk in with purpose because someone before them refused to walk out quietly. The story reminds us that policies don't write themselves. People do. And people can choose differently. The lesson isn't about banking. It's about humanity, about what happens when one person, armed not with outrage but with patience, record-keeping, and a spine of steel, says, "This far and no further." It's about what's possible when dignity meets opportunity. And it's about the courage of the ones who speak up even when their voice trembles, who stay standing even when the room looks away, and who say yes when given the chance to build something better. The philosophy remains. Dignity is not granted. It is asserted, quietly, relentlessly, until it reshapes the world around it. If this story stirred something in you, if you believe that justice starts with seeing and honoring one another's worth, then leave a number 1 in the comments to let us know. And if you want more stories like this, real stories that reveal hard truths, honor quiet strength, and remind us that fairness still matters, subscribe to our channel now. Because the next story might be one you've lived, or one you still need to hear.